Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back, and we're in Genesis. If you haven't seen the other videos, check them out. It's best to watch this in order, and that way you can decide whether or not you want to be here. We're going to be talking today about Isaac and that whole situation, and it's going to offend some people, so if you're sensitive, you don't want to be here. If you're not questioning your faith, you don't want to be here. Uh, we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about Genesis 21. The birth of Isaac. So, where we left off, Abraham had just attempted to prostitute his wife once again for livestock and goods, but God prevented that from happening, and a wandering angel just happened to let him know. And so, it was prevented from happening, so she became pregnant a different way, miraculously, at like 100 years old, or so, right? I think we assumed last time that she was a few years younger than Abraham, and so we put her at 95, right? And so this would be a year later at 96. And now the Lord attended to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. And so Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time that God had promised. And Abram gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore to him. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And when Sarah said, God has made me laugh, everyone who hears of this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. It's interesting because as we went through the history, we skipped a lot of that, but they tend to have children at a later age, like all of them. And so it's not inconceivable that the women were the same way, even though they didn't get listed that way. But here, she's making a point of the fact that I'm old. I shouldn't even be able to have kids. And yet, here I am having kids, miraculously, after the angel came and told me that I was going to have a kid. And exactly on time, because, that happens every time. But Sarah saw that so the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. We're going to be generous and say he was 2 years old at this point, right? That would put Ishmael at 15. He was 13 when the people came, and so now he would be 15. And then Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking her son. And she said to Abraham, expel the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Now, she's already run the woman off once, right? According to what we read. She's already run the woman off once, and the angel turned her around and said, no, go back. Right? So now she's again saying, get rid of her. And now this matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son Ishmael. But God said to Abraham, don't be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to everything that Sarah tells you. For though Isaac, your offspring, through Isaac, your offspring will be reckoned. But I will make a nation of the slave woman's son, because he is your offspring. Okay, so this is 2 children. This is 2 sons of Abraham. This is not a single son, but 2 sons. And that becomes important in a minute. It says right here, he is your offspring. So, yeah, that's your son. Right? That's counted your son according to, here's that word again. I think that we talked before, and we will again as we go through these books, about how there are different forces at play, and some of them are for good and some of them are for not good, and some of the ones that are for not good can be subtle and be deceiving, and sometimes it's more obvious than others when it happens, and sometimes it's There's darkness and terror, and then sometimes whenever there's an angelic visitation, there's not, right? Sometimes there's light, and sometimes they tell them, don't be afraid, but it's not because they're overcome with terror. Oh, but it does have entirely to do with how they're recognized. When we looked at the story of Lot, Abraham recognized the beings because they were recognizably different. They have a glow about them, an aura, a halo that makes them different, that marks them as different. Something about them shows you from a distance that this is not an ordinary man. All right. And early in the morning, Abraham got up and took bread and a skin of water and put them on Hagar's shoulders and sent her away with the boy. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And when the water in the skin was gone, she left the boy under one of the bushes. And then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she said, I cannot bear to watch the boy die. And as she sat nearby, she lifted up her voice and wept. And then God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, What is wrong, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he lies. Get up, lift up the boy, and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up and settled in the wilderness and became a great archer. And while he was dwelling in the wilderness of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Well, let's pop over and look at the areas we're talking about here. Bathsheba is right here. It is in the very edge of the Negev desert. This area is technically still part of the Negev, but it's right at the edge of actual fertile lands. The Negev is kind of desolate. This is where she's at for this, right? And the angel appears to her here at Beersheba, and then she goes off in this direction, and the mother finds a child, a bride in the land of Egypt, while they live in this area here. This area right here this is Mecca. Medina is right here. This is a holy place for the peoples of the region, right? And this is a good origin for them people. This is where it fits in, right? This is what they claim. They are descended from Ishmael, and it fits. But there were already Hamites here. There were already Hamites living in the area. That's who she sent off to find someone to marry, was with the Hamites, because all of these people were the children of Ham. Okay, now, he gives them one skinful of water and some bread, and then throws them out into the desert and says, all right, be gone. Well, she ran away the first time. She didn't have anything. And then she goes away this time and she wanders into the wilderness of Beersheba. And all she has is the wineskin and a 15-year-old boy. This makes it sound like, I can't bear to watch the boy die. And she left the boy under one of the bushes and lift up the boy. But he's 15 years old at this point. This is not a child, a toddler. This is nearly a man. He's old enough to have been, if not fully grown, well into his growth of however tall he's going to be. And it's a good assumption to make that he's going to be at least as big as his mother. Probably as big as his father. And so it makes it seem like it's some toddler that she's carrying off, but it is not. But then, like, she lifts up her eyes and she sees a well of water, right? And so she went and fills the skin with water and gives the boy a drink. Well, then we get down to the covenant at Beersheba, which is where she was just tossed out into, right? And at that time, Abimelech, I cannot say that today, and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me, or my children, or descendants. Show to me and to the country in which you reside the same kindness I have shown you. And Abraham replied, I swear it. But when Abraham complained to Abimelech about the well that Abimelech's servant had seized, Abimelech replied, I don't know who's done this. You didn't tell me about it. I ain't heard about it until today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech. And the two men made a covenant. And Abraham separated 7 ewes from the flock. And Abimelech asked him, Why have you set apart these 7 ewe lambs? And he replied, You are to accept these 7 ewe lambs from my hand as my witness that I dug this well in Beersheba. So that place was called Beersheba, because it was there that the two of them swore an oath. And after they made the covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, got up and returned to the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God, and Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So, the land of the Philistines is right here, just south of Canaan. This would be Canaan right up here. Right down here would have been the Philistines. The Abimelech's kingdom was right here in this area. And the Philistines were a little bit more this way. So Hagar is cast out from the tents, and she wanders into the desert and finds a pool at Beersheba. And then Abraham comes in shortly thereafter, I guess, because it's shortly thereafter in the text, and that is what we're meant to assume, is that shortly after he casts her out, he comes across this well and claims it as his own. And then the guy who's in charge of the land, Abimelech, doesn't know. So he's like, okay, we'll take this as witness that we dug this. Seems a little bit shady, but so far Abraham has proven himself to be a hell of a con man. And he runs several scams, up to and including stealing his sister from his father. And so, we get to Genesis 22. And then sometime later, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he answered. Take your son, God said, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. So Abraham got up early the next morning and saddled his donkey and took along 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had designated. And on the 3rd day Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and then we'll return to you. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the sacrificial knife, and the 2 of them walked on together. And then Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. Here I am, my son. The fire and wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 walked on together. And when they arrived at the place God had designated, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. And he bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar atop the wood. And then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. There's a lot of people that read a lot of hope into these verses. I am not one of those people. And I know that somebody probably just clicked off because I said that, but remember we talked about them forces and how you can be led by the wrong ones? I think that happened right here. Like, assuming that this entire situation happened as it is written, I still think that he was tempted by the wrong side of the force to go kill his son. He's already chased off one son into the desert. He's been promised that the son's going to make a great nation, right? But he doesn't know. He chased him off. That's a sacrifice of a son to make a great nation so that he can be blessed. Well, then he's got this one. His only son, right? God says your only son, Isaac. Well, it's not his only son, Isaac. Right up here, God said that that's your... Right here, he says, I will also make the nation of the slaves woman's son because he's our offspring. Well, that's your son. And who said that? Well, God said that. So, I think that this God here is one of the bad forces. This is one of the recognizably different but malevolently intended people. And that these people were trying to get rid of this bloodline, right? The one guy, the one comes and impregnates the wife, we'll put it that way, and I think it was an artificial insemination type deal, right? I think that they took a fully formed fetus and plopped it in there where it needed to go. But in order to cover the story, they had to make sure she didn't actually sleep with the Abimelech. Oh, and that's why that intervention happened. Was to tweak genetic lines and tweak DNA, which I think has happened repeatedly. But there are two different forces working at it. And I think that that's telling him to go sacrifice that son that was given miraculously is not foreshadowing a needed sacrifice down the road, because even right now that sacrifice isn't needed. There's no sin sacrifice in the time of Abraham. There's no sin sacrifice up until Moses. And so he tells him to take his only son, whom you love, and to go into the land of Moriah. And there's a lot of debate behind the land of Moriah. I spent way too much time trying to figure that out. I don't know where it was. Nobody really knows where it was. It was probably not on Temple Mount. That's about the only thing that's really verifiable. And that's the one the Jews that are there in Israel now, that's what they hold to. So it's the one that's pretty much verifiably not. By their own text. Like, this is the same text that they use. Alright. So he's about to sacrifice his kid. He's taking his kid up the hill, and the kid's like, oh, why we ain't got no sacrifice if we go and sacrifice? And he's like, oh, there's going to be a sacrifice. And then he gets up there and he ties his kid up, right? He binds him. And then he places him on top of the wood. So you know that shit's got to be awkward. You know Isaac is there like, Dad, what's going on? And like, he's acting, he's like this. What's going on? What's going on? And then, just then, the angel of the Lord calls out from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am. What are you doing? What are you doing? I just gave you that kid. Did not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your only son from me. That feels like shoehorn. Like that line feels like shoehorn. Even if you accept the story at face value, this line doesn't really mesh. It doesn't. I think that it was, again, this was the not malevolent force. Like, these two angels are going back and forth and they're fighting each other. And there's biblical evidence to prove that happens, right? If you look at a lot of the prophets talk about it, I think it was Daniel was talking about how one of the angels was held up by the other one. They were fighting. Okay. Do not lay a hand on the boy. And then Abraham looked up and saw behind him a ram in a thicket caught by its horns. So he went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. So to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. But nobody knows where that mountain is. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time, saying, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will multiply your descendants like the stars. Because that wasn't, the requirement for the last sacrifice. Like, that wasn't the covenant they already made for the last sacrifice and the one before that. That covenant wasn't made already. We need to make a new one. Because, God just needs to reconfirm these covenants. Because it is outside of his scope to control situational changes. He says, I'm going to bless you because you followed this, right? I think what happened is that the story of the sacrifice was a story in the area. And in using his justification for taking the land of Canaan, which comes later, Moses appropriated this story and fit Abraham into it. The Muslims believe that it was actually Ishmael that was sacrificed, and it was much closer to Mecca, which doesn't make sense if he was living in Beersheba. It was too far for a 3-day journey. But the timeline's thrown off, and it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And then the angel called the second time and says, I will surely bless you like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will possess the gates of their enemies. Because, they have enemies already. And through your offspring, all nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. And Abraham went back to his servants, and they got up and set out for Beersheba. And Abraham settled in Beersheba. Now, this is where the timeline gets kind of wonky. Is this before this, where he goes up and makes the covenant with Abimelech for the land, and he sets aside the ewes and says, I did the thing? Or is it before this in the wilderness when he gets rid of Hagar? Or is he returning to Beersheba? It doesn't specify. It just says they set out for Beersheba, and Abraham settled in Beersheba. That sounds like that's the first time he made it. Like, if this was going to be in the story, it would be at the beginning. And it wouldn't be Isaac. It would be Ishmael. Because at that point, he had one son. At that point, the sacrifice would have been getting rid of the one son. And they were already moving through the wilderness and heading in that direction. And it was prior to the casting out later of Hagar and Ishmael. That makes more sense from this text. And sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah has also borne sons to your brother Nahor, Uz, the firstborn, his brother Buz, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pidash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. And Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. Moreover, Nahor's concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Kaham, Tahash, and Makkah. Now, I think again, this was added in, right? It was incorporated to make it seem more historical, because these people would have been known, otherwise it wouldn't have been included. And so they listed these people off, and all of these people, all they really needed was Milcah born sons to Nahor, and one of them was Bethuel, and Bethuel's father was the father of Rebekah. They didn't need any of the rest of it. I think it was just trying to cement this divine claim to the land. All right, 23 is short, so we'll go ahead and do 23 and we'll wrap up today. Now, Sarah lived to be 127 years, so that was like 35, 40 years after she had the baby. And she died in Kirith Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went out to mourn and to weep for her. Now, this is an interesting turn of phrase too. Were they not living together? He was living in Beersheba, way down here. Well, Hebron is over here in the mountainous area, leading towards the Dead Sea. Like Jerusalem's way up here, but like he was supposed to be living down here towards the south, and she's up here when she died. So was he up here? Did he get run off again? Maybe he didn't bear good faith and allegiance like he was supposed to when he made his pledge, because he has a habit, it seems, of being run out of lands. And then Abram got up from beside his dead wife, so it sounds like he was there, right? And says to the Hittites, I'm a foreigner and an outsider among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I can bury my dead. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, Listen to us, sir. You are God's chosen one among us. I think Abraham was an itinerant preacher. I think he went around proselytizing the prosperity gospel to people. You are God's chosen one among us. Bury your dead in the finest of our tombs. None of us will withhold his tomb for burying your dead. And then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. And if you are willing for me to bury my dead, he said to them, listen to me, and approach Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf, to sell me the cave of Machpelah that belongs to him. It is at the end of his field. Let him sell it to me in your presence for full price, so that I might have a burial site. Now, Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth. So in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city, Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham, No, my lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. And again Abraham bowed down before the people of the land and said to Ephron in their presence, If you will please listen to me, I will pay you the price of the field. Accept it from me, so that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abram, Listen to me, my lord, the land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between us? Bury your dead. What it is like 10 pounds of silver. So that's like, this is bartering. It's very big in the Middle East. If you've never been, like, they want to barter about everything. Like here in the States, we don't barter. And if you're watching this from overseas, if you come here, we don't barter. We got a little stickers, tells us what the price is, and we either accept that or we don't. Over there, that sticker is a suggestion. And it can either go up or down depending on how you negotiate. And then Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the standard of the merchants. So Ephron's field at Machpelah near Mamre, the cave that was in it, and all the trees within the boundaries of the field were deeded over to Abraham's possession in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. And after this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field at Machpelah near Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and its cave were deeded by the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. Alright, so we're not going to get into the next part, is when Isaac receives his love, Rebekah. But again, like, what are we looking at here? We're looking at, it seems like Abraham once again got ran out of the land. It seems like he may be a bit of an itinerant preacher going around telling people, oh yeah, if you worship God, man, you're going to get blessed. Tell you what, how about you seed in to my ministry a little bit and you'll receive blessings. deed me your land, and you will receive blessings. Now, I don't believe for a minute that he would have been given the land freely. He may have actually purchased it, but what this really strikes me as, and there is zero verification for this, so this is entirely speculation on this, but it seems to me like maybe he wasn't supposed to bury her there, and this was Moses making an excuse so that when they go into the land where there are still grudges held against Abraham for taking this land and turning it into a burial site, that maybe he's convincing his people that there's a justification there. I could entirely be wrong, but it don't seem that way. Biblically speaking, that if this was going to be consistent with being a prophetic thing, having to deal with Jesus in those times, which is how most Christians read it, then this 400 shekels of silver would not have been that. It would have been 30 pieces of gold, right? Or 30 pieces of silver. The price of Judas, that's what this would have been, because he's buying, again, the burial site. And if he's buying the burial site, then it would make sense that it would be the same cost as the burial site that they get from whenever Judas loses or throws the money back to the Pharisees, and then they're like, well, we can't use this, and they buy a burial site. It would make sense biblically to be consistent in that manner. I think this was a shoehorn. I don't have anything to prove that. All I have is what I've told you, but that's how I feel. And this whole thing has to do with how I feel. Like, I'm reading this in the way that it's written. I'm not trying to, distort things or bring too wild of a supposition into it. There are things that I ask about because we don't know, and I suppose about because we don't know, but I just try to read it the way it's written. Like, without taking into account that this has to be the infallible word, and so this has to fit in this way into this prophecy that fits into this, that fits into that. What it says is what it says, and I can't stop that. Now, if you can listen to what I'm saying here, and you can understand what I'm saying here, and you can still believe in several of the different belief systems, you've got a consistency problem. Like, that's a problem why, I believe that Jesus was born, died, performed miracles, rose from the dead. I don't believe he was divine. I don't believe that Christianity as it stands is what he was trying to do. I don't believe that Islam as it stands was anything that was intended from this book. I don't believe that. I don't believe Judaism is following what was intended, even from this book. When we get into Exodus, we're really gonna step on some toes. I know I stepped on some today, and I will be stepping on some more all the way through this. So if you don't like your toes getting stepped on, I'm sorry, but this is not the place for you. If you do want to see somebody talking about this is what I'm talking about. This is where I have been specifically led. I have been told specifically to put this out there, despite the fact that I didn't really want to. This is just me justifying where I stand in my new position. And it's going to step on toes. I understand that. This isn't really even for y'all. This is for me. Because I'm self. I do stuff for me. Y'all just happen to get to share in it. I appreciate you being here. And to the crew, I appreciate every single minute that you're here. I really do. I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, this has been pittstake. Peace.